For someone whose entire career has been focused on joy, why a podcast on pain? Because these stories need to be told. A good phoenix rising out of the ashes story reminds us all that not only can we survive, we can thrive. And when we emerge, we're different. That's the alchemy of pain. Welcome to another edition of The Alchemy of Pain. In this podcast, I interview people who have experienced or been through or deal with painful circumstances. But instead of letting that pain break them, it has made them. It's made them into people that inspire, people that bring hope. And that's why I do this podcast, not to glorify the valley, but to shine a light and saying, look, if they made it through, you can too. Today, my great privilege is to introduce you to one of my dearest friends. I met her through work that I used to do and actually continue to do with a certain patient population. And when we met, it was almost like we were sisters from another mother. I heard her story back then, and we've only grown to trust and love each other. And though this is not a condition-specific podcast, I really felt the tug in my heart that you needed to meet Pattie Cornute and hear her story in the hope that it will help you or someone that you know and love. Pattie Cornute, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Brenda. This feels like deja vu.
It does. I think it was, 5 years ago when I interviewed you for the company that I worked for about the condition that we'll get into. And that instant connection was there, and your story moved me so deeply that it caused me to devote myself and still devote myself to helping this patient population. Let's start with how you serve in the world today. Who is Pattie Cornute?
That's such a heavy question. I would say my biggest serving right now is being a patient advocate for the condition that I have and for those people who are struggling with the pain that comes with the condition that I have.
So let's name it. It's called lipedema. Actually, lipolymphedema in your case.
Correct.
For those that don't know, first of all, don't tune out, folks, because at least 1 in 10 women have lipedema. They just don't know it. Many have not been diagnosed. What is lipedema, Pattie?
Lipedema is a connective tissue disorder that affects, like you said, they estimate 11% of those born female. It is debilitating. It's not like a typical fat. It is hard. It's kind of got like a hardened fibrotic-ness to it, and it grows. If you kind of feel it under the skin, it can feel like rice or peas or pearls, we like to say. And those nodules can be extremely painful when you push on them. And they tend to affect the lower half of the body, but it can also affect arms. And there are different stages to it. And when I was diagnosed in 2007, it had gone so long before I got a diagnosis that I was already well into late stage 3. And like you said, because I had advanced so far, I also had lymphedema on top of my lipedema. So it became lipolymphedema is what I actually have.
So let's talk about this a little bit more, because someone out there might be saying, okay, fat nodules that grow. So let me explain from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pattie. This will present at hormonal junctures usually.
Correct.
When you're in puberty, perimenopause, pregnancy. And there is this connection between the hormones and what happens in your body. The atrocity about this condition is so often patients are judged. You
No,
look at someone and say, stop eating those Twinkies. And it has nothing to do with that. It's like
correct.
your body is turning against you and creating fat. Some of the lipedema patients I've talked to have been nearly anorexic, and yet this disproportionate fat grows. When did you first notice that something was different about your body, Pattie?
I always noticed in like high school, I think was the first time I noticed. But before that, excuse me, I was very active. Like I loved riding my bike and being outside and, playing with my friends out. We used to live in like a roundabout, so we could literally ride around and just be outside all day. And it never bothered me. I was always a larger kid than everybody else, but it never slowed me down. When I got into high school, I started to notice that my thighs were just really growing, and it didn't compute with all the activities and stuff that I was doing. And I was still oblivious. Besides, I looked different. I felt fine in my body, and I continued to swim and bike and do everything that I like to do. I got into college and I started walking a lot. And that kind of started to show more because I went to a all women's college at the time. And so you kind of look around at everybody and you're like, I still don't look like everybody else, but I was still active and we went dancing and we did all this stuff. And at one point, my body was a size 4 on top and a size 12 on bottom. And I'm like, there's something wrong here. Like, I literally look like two different bodies kind of stuck together. Like, finding clothes was super challenging. I was always trying to, sew like elastic or something in the waistband so my pants wouldn't gape, because it really came with a much smaller upper portion of your body and then your hips and your thighs and in my case, it also affects my lower legs as well. And I think I first noticed the biggest shift was when I was pregnant with my daughter. And actually, after her birth via C section, right immediately in the hospital, I noticed my leg shape was changing. My lower legs looked like columns, like they were retaining fluid. And I asked, actually, one of the nurses mentioned it to me, like, have you ever had cellulitis? And I didn't know what that was. And that's like a staph infection almost that a lot of people with lymphedema have to be very mindful of. And so I didn't know what she was talking about. And I went back to my doctor and I got a big, huge runaround and eventually was told, you're going to have to seek a specialist. And I ended up, out of frustration, Googling big legs. And there was a woman with a blog that I just read from top to bottom and printed out every single link that she had connections to. And she just talked about her journey with lipedema. And that's when I was like, this is me. Like these literally look just like my legs.
So many people listening right now are having an aha moment because they have dieted and exercised. They have this disproportionate, smaller on top, larger on bottom. They're trying to get the waistband to work in their jeans.
Yeah.
And then there is the pain associated with this as well. It's not just what's happening with the body shape. So, what does it feel like to have lipedema?
It has layers for me. The heaviness is definitely just a constant ongoing thing. The fatigue that comes can kind of come and go. Like I tend to have the fatigue less in cooler months, I have it more in warmer months. And then the pain that's associated with it, like it's sometimes referred to as the painful fat disorder is what it was initially called, because if you press on it, it can be very painful to the point like if you held your child and they kind of as a baby, and kind of rest pounded their little feet on your legs, it would be excruciating for somebody with lipedema.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the same for if somebody just had, adipose tissue there, regular adipose tissue, they wouldn't have that level of pain. So the nodules themselves are causing pain. And not everybody tends to feel that. I have heard people in the group mentioning that they don't have that level of pain. And it seems like it didn't matter what stage you're at, because I have ladies who are in earlier stages 1 and 2 who have excruciating pain. And then I have people in, later stages that don't have as much pain, but have more of a disability and a loss of mobility. And it really, can impact your life tremendously. Like we call it the brutal disease. Like you feel like you're fighting every day to maintain the mobility level that you have.
And what I admire so much about you is that when you finally got your diagnosis, and I want to talk about some misinformation that you received, because what the audience doesn't know yet is Pattie leads some 13,000 people with lipedema through her Facebook portal, with her Instagram posts, her website, Lipedema Fitness. But you yourself were actually told at one point that exercise would exacerbate your condition.
Yeah. And that's where my pain aha moment kind of comes in. When I was diagnosed, like I said, in 2007, there was such limited information about it. There weren't Facebook groups, there weren't places to go for help. You felt really alone. And when I got diagnosed, at first you're like, there's something, I'm not crazy, because I'd been doing all the activities and I am a very healthy eater. And my husband is a very athletic individual and I don't get it. We'd have my doctor test everything and everything came back healthy, healthy, healthy. And one of the things that they had told me when I was diagnosed was that it is diet and exercise resistant. Like anything you did, like a normal person without the condition who was trying to, you know, lose weight and be healthier might change what they're eating or add more activity. And that wasn't what we were being told was going to do anything for the tissue. And so we were told, in fact, that exercise could make it worse. And I didn't know if they meant like the lactic acid, like that was a big, that's a whole nother podcast. But anyways, so you're fearful. The last thing you want is to be worse and to make this condition, get worse. And because I had gone from being, at one point in my life before the pregnancy and the delivery to a totally different person a few months later, I knew how rapidly that could happen. And so I was scared and we did everything we were supposed to do. Compression, legs elevated, stay out of the heat. And I immediately stopped all the activities that I was doing. I was somebody at the gym all the time. And I stopped. I mean, I was working out the day before I went into the hospital to have my daughter because it gives me so much emotionally to be active. So, long story short, I went from being told that and listening and doing everything I thought that was possible and doing other stuff too. When they told me don't exercise, I was like, all right, what else can I do? I'm going to learn Reiki. I'm going to learn other ways of healing my body. So I became a Reiki master to learn how to try to do things from a different perspective that maybe could help me deal with less pain. And it went on like that till about October 2012. My family was really big into Halloween and going trick or treating with our daughter. And she was 8. And I had gotten so much worse since my diagnosis in that short time span. And I had to watch her and my husband go trick or treating without me. And I sat there with my legs elevated, trying to do all the right things and just tears streaming down my face. And part of that was sadness over what I was missing out on. But a bigger part was the fear of where was I going to be next year? I just felt so helpless and like there was nothing I could do to have an impact on the direction of my life. And how was I going to get better from this? And that was probably the beginning. I mean, with this condition, I think with any chronic illness, It's gradual, it's progressive. So human beings are very adaptive, and I think we kind of get that little bit of pain and we learn to live with it. And then a little bit more comes or something new comes and we learn to live with it.
Mhm.
And I think we tend to be very strong bearers of pain. And that's what I think was happening. I was finding, you know, workarounds for not being able to do things and how to move my body differently if I couldn't move it in the way I was used to moving it. But that moment started, I think, maybe 5 months of me really living in a state of fear and being afraid that I wasn't going to be there to see my daughter grow up. And I finally had something happen emotionally. We had a family crisis that was a big hit emotionally to myself. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't be compromised physically and emotionally. So I knew I had to do something physically because it was going to be a while for us to, rebound from the emotional trauma that our family was dealing with. And so my husband was teaching CrossFit at the time. And I said, "What's the workout of the day?" And he's like, "Why do you want to know?" And I said, "Because if I fall down, I want to be able to get up and not need to call the ambulance if you're not home." And he said, "We can do that." And that's how it began. And it was so powerful. And it's been probably such a gift when I look at it, what this gave me to learn about myself, to learn about my body, and the connection between the physical and the emotional pains that we kind of go through, and the physical and emotional fitness that we can work on, and how one feeds into the other one and you can lean on one or the other as needed. And so that was the biggest day that I just and it was so powerful. It wasn't like I had to get, like, from where I was at with this very limited mobility to where I wanted to be. Every step that I got a little stronger and a little stronger fueled me to keep going and to keep fighting. And the biggest thing I wanted to do was to reach anybody else that I could that was like me, feeling alone, feeling like they weren't supposed to be working out, sharing what I was doing. And I'm going to tell you, when I started sharing what I was doing, because at this point there are now Facebook groups, and I was in lovely one, but nobody wanted to hear that from me because everybody was still being told it can make it worse. And who am I, this patient, to be contradicting what doctors are telling us? So instead of, I told the administrator of the group, I said, "I don't want to feel like annoying. I don't want to annoy people. I just want to be able to reach the people who are interested in possibly this different path." And so then I was like, what about if I start a Facebook group for fitness for lipedema patients? And that's how it began.
I, folks, you need to go and see what Pattie Cornute is doing now on camera, inspiring so many people. I mean, when I watch her, when I met Pattie, I never went to the gym. And now I do, in part because of her influence in my life. I mean, it started with you just wanting to be able to walk to the mailbox
Yep.
or using the kitchen counter for resistance so that you could do some movement. I have a thought about the word resilience, and I just want to run it by you. I believe that there are keys to resilience in life, but I think one important key is being obedient to your inner voice. There was an inner voice inside of you that said, I know the doctor is saying this, but I feel like I must move my body. And in that obedience, it broke something open. And not only did you find your resilience, but you're inspiring so many other people. Do you think that that's a valid premise, that there's something to not betraying that inner voice?
100%. I think the biggest, most important relationship you can have is with yourself. And you have to get to a point where you can listen to yourself and you can tune into it. We can be upset that we have lipedema, but we can't be upset at our bodies because no matter what you're trying to do, if you're upset at your body and you're directing that energy at your body, nothing you try to combat it is going to get you there. It's just going to be like a band aid. What you need to do is really give yourself some grace, whether it's physical or emotional. The thing that always surprises me is when somebody goes through grief and they feel like they have to follow a pattern of how to get through it. And I'm like, oh my God, like the most emotional place you could possibly be in your life. And we're worried about if we're doing it right. Instead of honoring what's coming up. Like for me, pain is our bodies telling us something's wrong. And if we listen, if we try to tune in, we're going to get information, right? We're going to learn something. And maybe we can address it in a different way. Like for me, one of the biggest changes and shifts in my journey with this condition was when they stopped calling it a painful fat condition and started calling it a loose connective tissue condition. Because I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I'm Googling loose connective tissue. Oh, fascia. What's fascia? And last year I took multiple courses in fascia. I took a fascia fitness course. I took a fascia manipulation course because I'm like, how can I find things that people in later stages or the similar stages me or even lower stages can do to help? Like there are many of us who aren't able to be mobile, so they're having to do things seated. So what can I help them with while they're seated?
Mm.
Because just taking that little action towards healing helps so much emotionally. And it's literally just all so connected that you can use one or the other or both to try to gain some relief and to move into that different direction of healing.
I think one of the reasons why your group is also so beloved and you are so respected is you are a fierce advocate and protector of the people that join your Facebook group and it is a private group. There is a public one, but there's also a private group for patients themselves.
Correct.
It's a shame that you even need to be protective, but there are mean people in every area of life. And when you are vulnerable enough to put yourself out there on social media, unfortunately, you also become a target at times. And how does the fierce mama bear come out? And what are some of your guidelines for people that join Lipedema Fitness?
Well, unfortunately, when you have a condition like this, like we talked about earlier, you've tried diets, you've tried exercising more. You get told every time you go to the doctor, no matter what you're going to the doctor for, well, you need to eat less and move more. And so to have a place where people could go and not have to worry about that was one of the biggest shifts that we did in our group. We didn't have any diet discussions. We are all about eating as healthily and cleanly as possible. And there are anti inflammatory ways of eating that you can look into. There are food intolerances that you can look into. And a lot of that has to do with the inflammation. That's kind of key in our condition. What we kind of try to watch out for is inflammation and fibrotic tissue. Those are the two main areas I guess I focus on. We can do that. It's not to say we're not doing that. We're just having a space that doesn't talk about it because when we tried to introduce it in the group, people come at it. You have people dealing with a lot of pain on a regular basis, and people in pain can be very aggressive sometimes, not always in a negative way. They can be very aggressive in what's working for them. And, just like I didn't want to annoy people because fitness was working for me,
Mm.
I chose to go into create a separate group. But I don't let it in my group. I can't tolerate drama. Like I just don't have time. And with 13,000 people in the group, I don't have time. I just now, I think last year, added one admin person who is a doll. She is like such a sweetheart. And she is there to help. And before that, it was just me. So anytime there was anything that was going on, it was me trying to sort it out, trying to appease everybody and wanting to encourage this person because they are doing amazing things. But you can't have the kind of discussion like it almost gets hard because they're having similar language that we've heard our whole lives by people at our doctor's offices,
Mhm.
you know. And you would think as a patient, you would hear what you're saying and it would kind of click in. Well, they may not be trying hard enough. They say they're trying, they say they're doing what I'm doing, but obviously, if it's working for me, it would be
Mm.
working for you. And that's not the case.
That is such an important point. And I think with all the projects that we collaborate on too, we always say there isn't just one way to
Right.
manage your condition. And if it's working for you, great. But everybody's got this space. Some people choose to pursue surgery, some people choose other avenues, whatever's working for you. But if you want to be inspired for mobility and movement and exercise, Pattie, your portal is a safe space. And for those of you just learning about lipedema, you're going to now Google and you're going to find a lot of different options that really 10 years ago weren't as prevalent. And we are so excited about that. There are great strides being made. There are even pharmaceutical advancements, and there are medical and surgical advancements, and there are new modalities that are coming out. The purpose of this interview is to talk about how one person took her pain, and you would have never asked for lipedema. But what you've done is you've responded to it, and it has fueled a purpose that is helping so many people. Can you think of a time in your experience leading the group where you're like, you know what? I would have never asked for this, but I am so glad I've taken this on.
I feel that way all the time. When we're on our roundtables and the people who are just in the chat section are going and supporting and sharing and caring, and they're so free with that information and meeting people at FDRS conferences for these conditions and other similar conditions and feeling that camaraderie. For the most part, the lipedema community is huge, loving, caring, trying to push forward things. And I think that's the majority of the community. And I just feel so grateful. Like I have such amazing friends because of this condition, but I also have such a better understanding of my body and like I literally know the most about my body. When I go to my doctor, she's asking me questions. I'm helping her understand what this condition is. But it's not just me understanding lipedema because I mean, quite frankly, they're still trying to figure out what it is and why it happens. And they, diagnosed in 1940, still no real, understanding. They're getting there. They're keeping progressing and moving. And that's because of all these fantastic lipedema patients who are sharing their stories and
Mm.
sharing their curiosities. I get so curious because if I can't find anything when it comes to lipedema, I start searching fascia and I start taking courses. And then I'm like, oh, what about this? And what about that? And I start pulling in questions and asking, our lipedema professionals and hey, talk to this other professional in the fascia world. And maybe you guys should talk, and I'm just like, get together and let's stay curious and just keep asking questions and learning. about bodies. It's not just about the condition. It's
Mm.
about our bodies in general, and how can we live happier, healthier, less painful lives, and I don't know that I would have had that level without this condition, and that's a lot to work through. To be in such gratitude to something that just has changed your whole life, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a common theme that I hear in this podcast. You know my story. You were there for me during my series of losses. You proved yourself to be not just a colleague through work, but a true friend. And I would have never asked for what I was dealt with. But we all get to control how we respond to it. And yeah, sometimes we hit the mat for a while. Stick a fork in me, I'm done. But then something happens. And like a phoenix rising out of the ashes, I mean, I'm sure you have your moments where you're blue and sad and depressed. We all are. This is the human condition. And yet, there is this little voice inside. And sometimes, here's my other premise, we might not fight for ourselves. But man, if there's a person we care about and they're hurting, it's like, no, 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 no. You're not, you might get me down, but you're not going to get them too. And I see you time and time and time again rise up for the people who look to you as a beacon.
I think I go through so many, um, pages on Instagram and Facebook and even on TikTok now, which is fantastic, and I just get such joy. Like, I see these post-surgery ladies dancing, like Allison, have you seen this woman? Dancing, and so fierce and so wonderful, and it just brings me such joy to see these people overcoming in their way. And, you've got people who have the condition and figure out what works for them and then become a help and resource for other patients. Like Kaz, she comes to mind, she went and took all the stuff that she was learning and continues to learn. And then she has patients with lipedema who come to see her that she now treats. And that stuff just makes me so grateful and honored to be in such a community and cheering them on at the same time.
Mm.
I'm trying to support somebody who's in later stage who no longer can get, surgery because of their stage. They're not a good candidate and have done everything that they can think of and be told to do. Even if it didn't make sense to them, they've tried everything. And my heart can just break for what they're going through, that it becomes anything I can do with whatever ability I have to share their stories or to try to talk about the critical nature of late stage, I'm going to do. Within my group, I'm kind of myself guided by the guidelines of the group to keep a safe kind of loving space. But outside of my group, I'm very positive for whatever people are doing. I'm in lots of groups and mainly I'm on Instagram because I love to just see the picture and to cheer on what they're doing. And, there's our friend Karen who's like in Nepal and she's climbing mountains. And I'm just like, it's just such an amazing world of patience.
Mm.
And then you have all the medical professionals who hear what we have to say, who are so equally curious and wanting answers, and they get so passionate about they go from having full-blown, you know, complete practices and narrowing it down to just lipedema because they're so moved by the patients that they see. And I just think between all the medical professionals and the patients and the vendors, it's just such an amazing community that at some point we are bound to have some serious solutions and answers.
I agree. And there's so much momentum, especially because of voices like yours. So I want to talk about two more things because I could talk to you forever because
I
I
know.
literally adore you. the importance of community. Maybe someone listening, watching, they may not have lipedema, but they may be feeling like a prisoner in their body or a prisoner in their life. The importance of finding people.
Yeah. And to go even further, be critical of who you find as your people. You get to say who your people are. You know, you may be somebody who doesn't want a toned down group like mine. You may want to be in a group that's more, pushing in a different direction. And you may not have the condition, like you say, and you may be looking for a supportive area. There are so many groups. I swear, if you type in your whatever you're dealing with on Facebook and groups, you will find a plethora of options. And go in, answer the questions, but read what they're saying their group is about so you kind of get an essence before you go in,
Mm.
because there are so many lipedema groups right now. And if you're in there, every single one is different from the next. One focuses on intolerances, one might focus on serious, you know, um, ways of eating, keto, all different types of things. And it's great to be able to tune in what you're interested in
Yeah.
and and find that support, and then you learn a lot more that way.
Just like a therapist. Sometimes you have to
Absolutely.
talk to a few different people before you find a good fit. So, again, listening to your inner guidance and
Yeah.
feeling what resonates and following that. So, you started out just hoping to get to the mailbox. Can we please talk about the lipedema triathlon?
Absolutely, my honor.
I mean, talk about, if someone had told you back when you were a prisoner of a chair, wondering if you were going to be mobile, that you would be running and leading a triathlon. That's an international event. We want to know about this. Our listeners want to know.
All right. So when I first started training with my husband, 2013, March, by May of that year, he and my daughter were doing a 5K for something within her school. And I went to go to be a cheerer, cheer them on. And I'm sitting there in the ride over going, what am I going to do while they're running a 5K? Like, am I just going to stand around? Like, that seems lame. So I build up enough courage to ask my husband, what do you think if I try to do the 5K? Now, I've literally been training, what, 2 months at this time? And he's like, oh, maybe next year. Actually, I asked, when do you think I'd be able to do a 5K? And he's like, well, if you keep training next year. And I said, well, what do you think if I just walk it? And there's benches. It was in our park. If I just sit on a bench and wait for you if I get too far and I can't. So I ended up doing that. It was brutal, but I finished. He had the timekeepers hold the clock so that I could come in. And he and my daughter met me, and it was a big tear fest. And I was so thankful for that because it had me thinking the next year that I wanted to do a 5K for that year's challenge. Like, I was giving myself fitness challenges, kind of so I would stay on target and have something to focus on to keep my momentum going. I'd never really trained for an event before. I just went because I liked to go to the gym. And so I went and did a lymphedema 5K. And then the next year I wanted to do one for lipedema and I couldn't find one. But all my training mates were doing mud runs, like mud, like hip high mud obstacles, like almost like Spartan races, but lots more mud. And they made me do it that year. So it was a 5K with all these obstacles. And then I'm like, I like the obstacles more
I don't
than the
like the mud
running.
so much.
I'm like, I'll take the obstacles, you do the running. But I did it and I made it. And then they stopped holding them. So now I'm back to what am I going to do that following year? And I'm like, I couldn't for the life of me find anything to benefit lipedema. And I'm like, what if I create a lipedema 5K? And I'm in my group and I'm talking to my group. And one of the people did open water swims at the time. And she was telling us all about it was coming up and you could come to where she lived and do them with her. And I'm like, well, that sounds so much fun. And the pool is a big benefit for people with lipedema because it acts like natural graduated compression. So it's a really great option for people in general, but especially if you have any lymph issues that you're dealing with. And I'm like, how can I make this as inclusive as possible? Because a 5K could be so challenging. And I'm like, what if somebody could do like a swim? Because we swim, we're in the water. I could add a pool, option to it. And then my brain went swimming, 5K, triathlon. So I'm talking to my group and they think I'm nuts. They think I'm insane. It was January and I wanted to do this for June for lipedema awareness. But I had a secret weapon. In my training group with my husband was an Ironman. And I asked her, do you think I can create a triathlon for lipedema awareness? Like sprint distance, the shorter distances. She's like, absolutely. Why not? And her boss was on the board at the local YMCA. And she's like, they have been after me for years to come up with a triathlon for them that they could have as an annual event. So, with her help, we figured out the sprint distances. And so you can do the swim, bike, or run portion. There's three different parts of it, but it's all inclusive. So, if you can only swim one lap and you want people to swim with you, that counts. If you can only walk a little bit and you can't walk a 5K, take the whole month to do it, build up to the distance. Only do the 5K, don't do all three legs. We have lots of people who just do the 5K. We have lots of people who just do the swim. You can take the whole month of June to do any portion of it that you want to do, or you can do it all on the same day with us in your own hometown. It's a virtual event. And like you said, it's international. We have people from France, Australia, the Isle of Man, just everywhere now participating. And we all, get shirts with different vendors, sponsorships on them. And it's just so much fun and such a great way to spread awareness for lipedema and the importance of staying active.
So often we get in our heads this big idea and we think it's too big, so we do nothing. You're famous for coming up with a line, and I want you to drop that line right now.
All or something.
All or something. And whatever that something is, to cherish it and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because your something started out as hoping that you could get up if you fell and walking to your mailbox. And now you're leading thousands of people and holding a triathlon. You are such a story that inspires, and you're a human being whose heart is really all about service. I love asking you the question, how are you serving in this world? Because there's nobody I think more qualified to answer than someone like you, Pattie. As we get ready to close, and maybe someone is listening or watching and they feel like a prisoner in their body, whatever their condition might be, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, what would you say to them?
Try to think of one thing that you can focus on, that you can put effort into, that can take you out of whatever pain you're dealing with. Whether it's your cat or your child or your grandchild or a favorite song lyric or a color, just if you can find a way to have a moment of ease within your discomfort, it breaks the cycle and it allows a different energy level to kind of come in. That's what I would say. Look for, we call them glimmers. Like this is something I learned last year, I think, was when we focus on whatever we focus on grows. Have you heard that before? So if we focus on a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of, pain reduction or joy, little things, those add up too. And so when I'm at my lowest and I'm struggling and I can find myself easily going down the what's going to happen if I keep progressing avenue, if I can focus on something that can break that chain, or I can do something physical. Like for me, being strong in some way, in whatever way I can be at that time, it may just be holding a weight while I'm sitting and raising it overhead. Just one thing, one step at a time, one thought at a time. That's kind of where I would suggest to start.
That's beautiful advice. I take it to heart. That would apply to anybody who's watching or listening. You can learn more about Pattie Cornute by following her on social media at Lipedema Fitness. You will be so glad that you did. I am forever grateful that I met you and have gotten to know you and love you.
I
Thank
love
you
you.
for being here on today's Alchemy of Pain podcast.
Thank you, Brenda. This has just been amazing. Love
Yeah,
you.
I love you too. And I want to thank you for tuning in. And as I end every podcast with this exhortation, let it in. If you are in a dark place, sometimes it can feel like you're never going to get out. But just like that caterpillar is in the chrysalis, keep pressing, because you are creating strength in your wings.
Mm.
And ultimately, you will fly, and we'll be cheering you on. Have a great day.